ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Rochelle Travers, and this is The Leader. The sounds of swimmers at Charlton Lido cooling off, and people sunbathing on Bournemouth Beach, on what is now officially the hottest day ever recorded. So, just in case you were wondering, yep, it's still hot. Another record-breaking day for UK temperatures. At the time of recording this podcast, the Met Office says London Heathrow reported a temperature of 40.2 degrees Celsius, and there's still time for that to be beaten. During the extreme heat wave, roads have melted, train lines have buckled, and there's been a big dip in productivity across the country. It's got many wondering that with the hot weather set to become more of a regular thing in London and the rest of the UK, is it time for us to heat-proof our infrastructure? Professor Hannah Cloke is a climate expert and natural hazards researcher at the University of Reading.
So in no way have we been prepared for these extreme temperatures. The one thing we've got right is that we're actually forecasting them in advance. So we had a little bit of advanced warning when they're coming towards us. And we did have some kind of planning in place in terms of alerting the population and making sure that hospitals and things were ready. But certainly not our buildings and not our transport systems. And we've seen, railway lines shutting, roads melting, and people overheating. So we've got a long way to go in being prepared, in my mind.
What are the biggest risks with not being prepared in these situations?
So I think the biggest risk is mortality. So people will die. Heat waves are silent killers. They come along and we don't really see them doing the damage that they're doing. And it's only afterwards when we look at the statistics of how many people have died that we realise what a large event heat waves are. It's very different to something like a flood or a storm, which is very noisy, comes along, causes lots of destruction, and you can see that immediately. So that's obviously a big risk, and obviously to people's health as well. It affects a lot of people's health. But of course, it's more than that. So when we've got our railway lines are not functioning properly, or people aren't able to get to work and undertake the things they normally do during the day, that has a knock-on impact in terms of the economics of how we're living, and it really can do quite a lot of damage to business.
As you mentioned, there's been a lot of damage caused. How problematic is that structural damage?
So heat waves are one of these things where I think the biggest risk is, we have a health risk, we have a risk that people will die. And there is some structural damage from heat waves, but normally we can repair that quite quickly. So I think the biggest impacts are always those unseen ones, those ones that go out into the economic sphere. So businesses will have had quite a substantial loss, basically from lack of business and people not being able to do their job. The question is, are we ready for another heat wave, perhaps even this August, or another heat wave next summer? And the more heat waves we get, the more disruption there is, the more damage we might see. So it's a question of these kinds of being ready for the next heat wave.
Why is it the UK can't cope with these temperatures when other countries get them far more regularly?
Yeah, so we have to remember that, lots of our daily lives, it's all about, what's normal for us. So the buildings where we live and work and the jobs that we do and the leisure activities we enjoy, they're all a function of the climate where we live. And here in the UK, our society was built around, medieval agrarian institutions and 19th century railways and pre-Second World War houses. And they've all been designed for this different climate. Our houses have got often these pitched slate roofs and chimneys and built around the technology of coal fires and designed to keep us warm and dry in these industrial revolution winters and not cool in these hot, swelteringly hot 21st century summers. So in this context, when we're adapting our society to the reality of these regular heat waves and things like more extreme rainfall as well, it's a massive task, actually.
London seems to have particular issues with coping with the heat. Why is that?
London's a wonderful place in many ways, but it is a higgledy-piggledy mess in terms of its planning and how people are living together. It's definitely not a planned city. It's it's evolved over a long period of time, and that brings with it its own problems. So you've got a lot of legacy buildings and structures from many different periods, all kind of meshed together. And that's really difficult then to retrofit places or to provide city design that can help with cooling. So things like trees and water, bringing those into the city are great, but that's actually practically pretty difficult when you've got this old city with lots and lots of layers put on top of it.
Let's go to the ads. Stay there to hear more from Professor Hannah Cloke. Whilst you're here, why not give the leader a rate and follow? Welcome back. Professor Cloke, what needs to be done to future-proof London and the rest of the UK, given that this heat might not be a rare occurrence anymore?
So we need to think about quite a lot of different things together. Certainly using things like insulation. Insulation is great for keeping out the cold, but also the heat as well. And really thinking about heat specifically when we're building new houses, but also when we are retrofitting, really bringing into mind that we have to deal with these new very high temperatures, and we will have to continue to do that. There will be places where we will need air conditioning. There's no shirking away from that. Air conditioning brings its own problems in terms of increased energy use, but it will be necessary. So I think we really have to think about as we go into these periods where we're regularly experiencing very uncomfortable temperatures, air conditioning will be required in some places, perhaps on the tube as well. There are some tube lines that are incredibly hot and very uncomfortable, even at lower temperatures than the ones we've been experiencing at the moment. Also things like roads and drainage. So with heat waves often comes very heavy rainfall afterwards with thunderstorms. So you've got these linked up hazards happening together. And we know that we don't really have very adequate drainage in London. And that has caused some severe flooding before and probably will do again.
How urgent is it for the government to prioritise this issue?
I have one hope from this heat wave in that it will bring home to the government and to other people who are making these types of decisions that this is urgent now. These temperatures were very high. People could not cope. Our infrastructure could not cope. There is an urgent need to do something now. This will happen again. It will happen next year. Without a doubt, something will happen to do with extreme weather next year, because we are in that place where it is getting worse and worse.
Why has it been left for so long? Is it purely a money issue?
It's always a question of money. It's always a question of where you put your investment. I think some of it, though, is to do a little bit with imagination and the idea that you can't really understand something unless you've already experienced it. And when we get these unprecedented temperatures and we get these perhaps unprecedented storms or floods or anything like that, it's only afterwards that people realize what's going on. And so I hope that this is, some kind of trigger for some change in the way that the urgency of really revamping the infrastructure so we can keep more people safe for future heat waves.
Is there anything ordinary members of the public can do to heat-proof themselves?
Yeah, so there are lots of things you can do to help yourself if you're in a house with windows or an apartment with windows. You could think about putting shutters on the outside. If we're going to see these types of heat waves going into the future, that will be a reasonably straightforward thing to do to keep that heat out on those few days a year when it is just sweltering. There are things to do with air conditioning you can do. So if you really need it and your house is just not suitable at all to keep cool in, then you might want to think about air conditioning and insulation as well. So insulation can really help in the right situation. There's other things about just living slightly differently as well. So we've all not really been out in the middle of the day. And that's kind of a Mediterranean lifestyle choice really as well. So it's not just about where you live but it also how you live and how you use that daytime and work a bit flexibly if you can, of course.
And that's it from The Leader. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.